that we're not inherent because 15% of schools are already doing what the plan is doing. However, there's still attitudinal barriers in place preventing school start times from being no later than 8. And in addition to that, they claim that the status quo solves. But if that were true, we would already see solutions in the sleep deprivation public health epidemic, and we don't. And they didn't provide any evidence that the status quo is enough to solve for that. Further change is needed, and that change only comes through passing the plan.
Okay, too long.
Yeah.
Let's get rid of attitudinal, because remember, this is the slow communications. They're not going to know that.
Right.
The response here should involve the 85%. Like, yeah, 85% of schools aren't doing that. That's what we're fixing.
Right.
And then, this status quo solves. Our X evidence, our Y evidence, our Z evidence disagrees. It says blah.
Right.
And
Okay.
our evidence is from 2017. They're high school students.
Okay.
Right? You got the rest of you should be up there. It's a line. Like we're just going to rotate through.
Still thinking.
Okay, let's go, MJ.
All right, so first our opponents say that we are not inherent because 15% of the schools are already solving this issue. However, that means 85% of the schools aren't solving this issue. So there is an inherency problem right now in the world. And next they say that the status quo is already solving, but if the status quo was solving, we would already see changes to these problems. We would see a decrease in suicide rates, car crashes, things like that are caused by sleep deprivation. So if the status quo is already solving, we wouldn't have these problems.
All right, two things. First thing, kind of something we talked about last time. I want some voice modulation. We're still a bit monotone.
Yeah.
And that's going to be something we work on. No big deal. We'll work that out. Second thing, instead of saying if this were true, then this would blah 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 blah. We are going to be more persuasive by saying something like that's not true. Our X evidence, our Y evidence, our Z evidence says it's a public health epidemic. People are dying. Phrase it as we have proven they are wrong, as opposed to if they were right, then this, then this. They're wrong because.
Okay.
That's random.
Our opponents say that we are not inherent because 50% of schools across the country already have changed their start time. But our plan is going to be increasing those 85% of schools for their start time. That is helping hundreds of thousands of children. That is going to be increasing our numbers dramatically. Second, our opponents say that the status quo is already solving. But if it's solving for that 15%, we can solve so much more in that 85%.
Okay, very similar feedback here.
Okay.
Instead of hundreds of thousands, it's tens of millions, right? 85% of middle and high
Well, I don't have
schools.
an exact number.
What are you two?
I was
Boy.
walking forward.
Same comment I gave to MJ about the status quo solves argument. We have proven with this evidence, with this evidence, with this evidence, that's not true. We need to come out and in attack mode go after that argument as opposed to saying like, well, if. It just doesn't sound as strong, it's not as persuasive. Who's next?
Okay, so our opponents argue that we're not inherent because 15% of schools are already solving for the start time, but we read evidence from 2017 that 85% of schools are still not changing this. They're not changing their start times. So the status quo still hasn't solved for any of our impacts. The only way that you solve for our impacts is passing our plans and getting as many schools to change their start times as possible.
Okay, good. You did we've proven X, we've proven X. Let's get names of authors,
The authors' names.
and let's get quals. That's the strength of this affirmative is it's not just somebody says it, it's the most qualified people say it.
All right, I don't have authors or qualifications.
That's all right.
Just a preface.
This is why we're doing it. We're doing it to learn.
Judge, our opponents say that the status quo solves because 15% of schools have already passed this plan. However, this is clearly not true because 85% of schools are still having troubles with sleep deprivation. And while the majority of these schools are having trouble with sleep deprivation, it is still a public health epidemic that needs to be solved by passing the plan.
Okay, 2 comments for you. Let's be more succinct on the 15%, 85%. We just need to say 85% of schools don't do this.
Okay.
We fix that. That's our argument, right? And they're not doing it for some reason. We don't care why they're not doing it, but we fix that. then let's get more specific on the status quo solves. Status quo doesn't solve because our Troxel evidence says it's a public health epidemic. Our Hafner's panic and Troxel evidence says that it's costing us billions of dollars. Our, whoever evidence from 2017 says that it hurts academic, right? Just list them. Boom, boom, boom. It's not working, it's not working, it's not working. Andrew, you back up?
Yes. So our opponents say that we're not inherent because 15% of schools are doing the plan now. However, that means 85% of schools across the country are still not doing the plan. And this goes to show that it's not enough. Our Troxel 17 evidence, our CDC in 2017 evidence, and our Jason evidence all claims that the issues associated with sleep deprivation are happening now. And in addition to that, that proves that the status quo isn't solving, because if it were, we would see a reduction in all these issues that our evidence lays out, and it has not. Our Troxel 17 evidence was published in August of this year, so we have the newer evidence. That was a week finish. But
Okay, so the first part was really good. We solve 85%. When they say status quo solves, we need to do two things. Number one, we need to be specific about what is the status quo not solving. Well, it hasn't solved the public health aspects, right?
Right.
Because our evidence says so. It hasn't solved the academic performance issues. Our evidence says so. And because we haven't changed, we're losing billions of dollars because our evidence says so. And then the comment here specifically to you, Andrew, is be accurate with the evidence that you're citing. Like the Jason Foundation evidence stands for what idea in the affirmative?
That sleep deprivation is an aggravator of suicide.
No. The Jason evidence just says how many people die of suicide.
Right.
The causal, like sleep deprivation bad causal evidence is Troxel, Hafner's panic, Clark, McKeever and Clark. It's that evidence. So we just got to be accurate. And and don't get me wrong. You guys this is why we're working with the app. I don't expect you to find me the third, name me the author of the third piece of evidence in the app. But this is how we learn it. We work with it.
I got it real quick, right?
Who's next?
Our opponents say that we are not inherent because 15% of schools across the country have changed their start time. But our plan is going to be helping 85% of schools. That's tens of millions of children that we will be helping. Second, our opponent says that the status quo is solving. But according to our Hefner, Stepien, and Troxel 17 evidence, we still have a health epidemic. Wallstrom shows that a lack of sleep is still hurting schools academically, and Jacob and Rakoff 11 show we increase quality of life later for all students, even more so for students at a disadvantage with our plan.
Something like that. That was very well done, Faith.
Thank you.
Does everybody see the difference between if they were right, then this would happen as opposed to what Faith did? Does everybody hear the difference?
I was trying to get one from each of the authors,
Yeah,
so
that's
they
what I-
don't
that's
do
what I
like
thought
the
about
same
that,
one. They're
yeah.
like, oh, it's the same one.
Yeah. And first of all, let me say this. Don't be afraid of you talk about Trox a lot. Yeah, if we were having a debate about the theory of relativity, we'd probably talk about Einstein a lot because they're the most authoritative on that subject. Don't be afraid of that.
Fair enough.
Right? Like if in this room, if we're like, let's have a conversation about the Atlanta Falcons, and we talked about MJ a lot, okay, he's the Atlanta Falcons fan in the room. That makes sense.
What are the Atlanta Falcons?
Anyway, MJ.
City of Atlanta. Alright, first our opponents state that we are not inherent because 15% of schools are already doing the plan. However, that means 85% of the schools aren't solving, so therefore there is a problem and we will solve it. Next, they say that the status quo solves, but they are wrong because one, we wouldn't have these problems if the status quo was already solving, and two, our Troxel evidence states that schools fail to follow these guidelines, our Hafner, Stepanek, and Troxel evidence states that this is a public health epidemic, and our Wallstrom evidence states that academic performance is suffering, therefore the status quo isn't solving.
Like it.
All right, our opponents claim that we're not inherent because 15% of schools are already solving for the start time issue. But we've read evidence by Stepanek and Troxel, the two leading researchers in the world on sleep medicine. It says that right now, 85% of schools still haven't targeted the start time issue. Therefore, our impacts of health problems and suicide prevention aren't being fixed in 85% of situations. Prevent innocent teens from committing suicide and vote affirmative.
Okay. Brady did something a little different. I think it works. He combined the 85% aren't doing it with the specific issues we identified. I think that's well done. Hits what we want. Okay, Michael.
Give me another minute.
Okay,
Don't get another.
Andrew.
I know.
Prep time's over, Mike.
We already used our prep time.
Yeah, you remember Nats?
So our opponents claim that we're not inherent because 15% of schools are already solving the problem. However, 85% of this leaves 85% of schools that are not having an appropriate start time, and this doesn't solve the problem. In addition to that, they say that the status quo solves. However, our Stepanek and Troxel in 2017 evidence indicates that a public health epidemic is still happening right now, and this was published in August of this year. In addition to that, the academic side of the debate still isn't being solved for, and that was our Wallstrom 14 evidence claiming that there's still a gap in academics caused by sleep deprivation. And finally, the benefits to the economy are not being solved for, and that was Troxel on her own in 2017 claiming that, I don't know, that really doesn't matter. I don't know.
Okay, we were doing really good up until that very last part. So, and it's all in the phrasing. You've got the idea down that we want to say they're not fixing this, they're not fixing this. And the first two are phrased in the negative, like we aren't improving public health, we aren't improving academic performance. You just have to flip the phrasing and say we aren't reaping the economic benefits, we aren't gaining billions of dollars. Something like that. That's all you got to do. You've got the idea, just kind of you got to flip the phrasing a little bit.
Okay.
Ready, Mike?
Yeah, I'll give you what I got right now.
Because after Mike goes, I'm gonna give you two new arguments,
Oh, well.
Oh, cool.
and we're gonna repeat the process.
All right. On to their first argument. Judge, our opponents argue that the status quo solves. This is untrue, however, because 85% of schools that don't have an appropriate start time. This means that we have teens who have increased suicide rates, who abuse drugs, and who have many chronic illnesses. I'm sorry, that was really bad, Jeff.
No, that was fine. That was fine. So here's
I didn't even know where I was going with that.
Okay, so argument number one is 15% of schools are already doing it. You got but that means 85% aren't. We fixed that.
Correct.
You then began to incorporate, that means that there are still teens at risk of suicide, at risk of the public health things. Cite the author. Who says that?
Right, yeah.
Then move on to, and oh, by the way, there's students are suffering academically. That's this author. And we aren't gaining the economic benefits, says our other author. Okay? So you've got the idea down. That's all we need to do. Okay, so grab a seat.
Okay.